Hey everyone, what's up? Big Jason. I'm here with Bon Halbert. What's up, Bon?
Hello, that's Sir Bond of Halbert to
Oh,
you.
that's right.
No, just kidding.
So, guys, today we're gonna break down an ad that Scott Haines wrote, and it actually returned $21 for every $1 spent mailing to cold lists. That's pretty impressive, right, Bond?
That is extremely impressive. Most people mail to cold lists in the industry only make money on the back end, which means that they break even or lose a little bit of money mailing, and then it's only mailing the buyers secondary products that actually makes them money. My father, Scott, and a few others are a few of the people who are good enough where they make money on the first mailing to cold lists. And cold lists just means, people who've
Right.
never heard from you before. So yes, it is
Awesome.
extremely, extremely impressive.
Cool. So, before we do the breakdown, I just wanted to get your thoughts on our mutual buddy Scott. Just talk to us about how you got to know him. Uh, you know, Talk to us about him as a person, not the copywriter, and his copywriting uh, skills and his course.
I think, along with his course, but Scott is one of the most underrated guys in the business that I've ever met. And if you meet him, you really just don't get a clue as to how great he is or was. I remember when he first came down to study copywriting with my father. He's this kind of like shy boy from Oklahoma who you could make blush in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad being as grandiose and being as wild, and granted, my dad was really wild in a lot of ways, personality wise. But back then, my brothers and I were pretty. We had a reputation on the island we lived in. But I looked at Scott and I was like, oh boy, are you in for one serious shocker here? And but to my surprise, I would have predicted that he was going to wash out or just like I can't handle this kind of a thing, but he didn't. He absorbed everything. He took all the lessons that he was learning from my father to heart, and he started writing and started writing and putting in the kind of work and the ethic. A lot of people think that copywriting is just cruising around in a car and you have this great idea and then you sit down and you pound out a fantastic piece and stuff like that. But there's, you'll see that there's a lot of serious hours put in by the top copywriters. Lazy copywriters won't do research. Lazy copywriters, they'll be happy with making a few bucks online, and because they did something online and didn't spend any money advertising, to become profitable, they only have to make $10, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden they start shifting into gurudom and stuff like that. But Scott was one of the true professionals. He's the guy, he did the kind of work that, you see the copywriters at all the big outfits actually do, which is, he does the research, he puts in his time, gets several different kinds of headlines, options, weighs it all, because you don't get, when you're doing paid traffic, especially back in the day before you could just, quickly test things to email lists and stuff like that. You had to pay. It's quite a bit of money, and so you did it. You wanted to take your best stab at it the very first time. What you thought was your best shot, and so you put in the time and effort, and you did research, you did work and stuff like that. And then if you did well, it paid off, and it paid off big. This one in particular is a direct mail piece, and there's a lot of benefits to being in direct mail versus print or online. Online, you get ripped off in a heartbeat. Somebody says, "Oh, this thing's running everywhere." Excuse me. Let me just, copy and paste it and change the name of who it's from, and I'll just
Right.
steal it, and it'll be mine. Online or offline, that's a lot harder to do. One, most of the people who do that aren't on the mailing list. They cannot see all the different mailings that are out there. They don't know if the mailing is profitable or not because they don't see the returns from it and so forth. And there's a big universe. And the other, another obvious advantage, and I don't want to go on too long about it, another great advantage of direct mail is, people they don't just dump their snail mail address. You don't just move because you're getting junk mail. Like, you'll have A pile, B pile email addresses and stuff that I always talk and teach people to get the A pile email address. But when you get there, snail mail addresses, everybody's got one, and it's a great business to be in still. A lot of people don't think it is, which is a good thing for people in the business, because there's little competition in that mailbox. But back to Scott, he was a master at doing that, and being able to do that is really a very valuable skill. And if you could do it, the kind of stuff that he did in print, and you can do it in direct mail, that makes doing it online even easier. Because like I said, you need a certain percentage response rate to break even, to make your money back. When you're dealing with email lists and everything, you just need to convince people to mail the emails. But when you have these kinds of skills, the difference is instead of getting a 20% open rate, you're going to get a 50% open rate. Instead of getting the amount of money, dollars per click that you get goes up and everything. And so old school stuff is stuff that you really want to study, because it had to pay well, and you had to do a good job, a much better job to be in the money and to be profitable.
Definitely. And speaking of that, you mentioned about going from offline to online. I interviewed Scott's longest running client. We won't mention his name here because we don't want anybody finding Scott's letters. But his longest running client told me that he basically took multiple letters from as far back as 2003 that made millions offline, and he put them online with barely changing anything, maybe adding pictures and stuff. And he's still running them today, and he cannot pay a copywriter enough to beat Scott. He goes to events where, in the niche, and he looks for young copywriters, and he says, hey, can you beat this control? He still cannot. Multiple controls, he cannot find anyone to beat Scott's controls from way back then. Does that shock you?
Actually, it doesn't shock me, and the reason it doesn't shock me is two reasons. One, Scott is very good. There's talent there as well. It's not just, but also on top of that, the new breed of copywriters, especially online, they are writing more for instant gratification. They don't want to put in the time and the effort. When you're talking about pieces that Scott put weeks into writing, where everybody else is putting minutes into typing.
Right.
And that's the difference between that and what's going on now. If you learn the old school techniques, if you actually do a little bit of research, if you actually learn how to write and get your voice and so forth, you'll see your writing skills and your copy will evolve over time and get better and better and better. And there are guys who do that online, but they're the guys who are running the campaigns. They're making millions of dollars, and they're buying traffic. And that's the real difference. Most of these copywriters that he's trying. That's the real key there. He's trying to get some young copywriters. And I'm not bashing people who are young. Scott was very successful at an early age. I mean, he passed at an early age. So it's the fact that he was putting in time and energy and doing stuff that modern copywriters don't do. And that's a good, there's good and bad news in that. The bad news is it's hard to hire somebody who actually does do it. But the good news is it makes it, if you want to study, if you get Scott's course, or you get a mentor and you start studying copywriting and you do the work, it means that you can be better than all of them. A lot of people think, I want my competition to be weak. When somebody sends me their copy, for a critique, I want it to be bad because that's what puts money in my pocket, because I help them fix it. And so as a copywriter, if you're a young copywriter listening to this, look at that as, the bad news is, yes, if you want to write as well as Scott or some of the other guys, you're going to have to put in the time and the energy and the effort. But the good news is, if you do put the time and the energy and the effort in, you can, crush it. You can beat controls. You can make a name for yourself and get really good. So, and talent is, talent is part of the equation. You could beat somebody with talent who doesn't put in energy and time by putting in more energy and time. So you don't. So I guess the point I'm saying is the very best copywriters in the world, the very best of the best, they put in time, they put in energy, and they have talent. The bulk of copywriters who you have to beat, the bulk of the people who you're in the race against that you want to be ahead of to get a good time at the end of the marathon are weekend warriors, and they don't put in the time and the energy. Right. And so beating them is a lot easier. So if you want to make a living as a copywriter, it's faster to put time and energy into your pieces and to get stuff done. Now, and working as much as you possibly can, getting, writing. As my father says, the best way to get good at writing is to keep writing.
Yep.
So, but Scott had talent, but on top of that, the reason I think it's hard to find people who could beat his stuff is, the time he put into, this, and the time that he put into the stuff that still works was not measured in minutes. It was measured in weeks.
Awesome. So before we talk about his course, Scott, me and him, thanks to the introduction from you, we were hanging out in person, for the last 4 years in Las Vegas and Austin. And I'd always hear him say, yeah, I talked to Bon. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about what you knew about Scott as a person over the years?
He's very wonderful guy, very nice, very giving, very loyal. He's got all the qualities you want in a friend, except for punctuality. He was, and a great sounding board. One of the things that you want to do as a copywriter is get a group of other copywriters that you're friends with so that, you read things to. I'm really going to miss him. He was one of my, what I call Skype victims. And, so there's a small group of people that I will call up and say, hey, let me read this to you and tell me how it sounds. And they would say, that's really good, but I would add this, or, and the real key is when, I sell to a lot of people who want to become copywriters. So what I want to hear is, hey, send me a copy of that product that you're just describing right away. Right. But he was one of the sounding boards, and our friendship was really great. I remember one time I was sitting there, I was at my son's soccer game, practice actually, and I was waiting for him to finish practicing, and I was working on a laptop at the time. And Scott said, hey, do you want to sell my course for a little while? And I said, sure. So I started pounding it out. And before we had sold some with his swipes, and we had sold some with things that other people had written. But this year, I was the one writing it. And so I got to write my real thoughts about it and stuff like that. And I made a quick note, and I wrote this, and it didn't take me very much time. Now, that's not going against the things that I was saying earlier about putting in time, because I knew the audience really well. I know the product really well. I know the guy behind it really well, and so forth. So it didn't take me very long to spit out something that was from the heart and was very good. And it really outsold many of. We sold tons of Scott's courses for him, and I think the first email beat like the entire series of emails that we had sent the year before. But I remember he wrote me back, and he says, that was really good email. I thought it was great. And I said, thank you. And this was before we ran it. Right. And he said, but the most amazing thing was I put it through the Hemingway app. And, as I'm sure everybody knows, that you want your language to be very common language. You don't want people thinking, wow, this guy's got a massive vocabulary, and I start looking up words and stuff. You want to give them their thoughts. You don't want their thoughts to be taken away from the copy and to start thinking about how you write or thinking about, how smart you are or anything like that. Right. So you want your language to be pretty base level. And Hemingway is an app that measures that. And he came back to me. He goes, I put it through your Hemingway app, and it came back 3.5 grade level. And everybody, shoots for 5. And, and I remember feeling so proud that Scott Haines said that my copy was good, and that Scott Haines had taken the time to do that. But that's the thing about Scott. I didn't use Hemingway app. And for the most part, because Scott was more professional than I am by far. And he's the kind of guy who says, wow, that's really good. Let me see how it does on Hemingway, and measures things. And, he's that into copy. He studies other people's copy, like these swipes. He studied, that, you're sharing with the world. He was also, looking at everybody's swipes and analyzing them, paying attention, breaking them down in his own mind, saying, and that's the thing. Swipe does not, I think my dad did everybody a disservice by, popularizing the term swipe, because he made it sound like, you just take the copy and plug in your own business. That's not the way it works.
Right.
And in fact, you're doing a disservice when you do that, because the truth is, if you ran a pizza joint and said, 30 minutes or it's on us, it doesn't feel fresh and exciting. And everybody's like, yeah, I've heard that deal before. Right? It's not about that. It was actually about swipe it out of the paper, swipe it from this pile of mail, and put it into your folder, and then break it down, find out why it works, and then try and implement those lessons into your own promotions. And Scott did that. And Scott did it to, like I said, he's made a study of copywriting to such a degree. I mean, his wealth of knowledge was unparalleled. And, you can ask me, oh, do you remember so-and-so wrote this piece? I may or may not know it. He knew it. He's like, yeah, that was so-and-so who wrote that. And, he studied copywriting to a degree, into a level that was just, it's one of the reasons he was so good. And, if they gave degrees in copywriting, he would have a doctorate and he'd be a professor.
Awesome. So what would you say to a young budding copywriter who is interested, who maybe's heard of Scott's course and they're considering getting version 2 that's coming up?
Okay, before he passed away, and long before people really kind of knew who Scott was, I was among the very first to say that Scott's is in the top 3 copywriting courses on the world. And I'm the one who popularized, and this isn't about me. I'm just saying, I'm trying to let you know this is how much I believed in Scott's course and his information and stuff like that. People would ask me, what courses to get. And I, of course, can, have access to all of them. And people would send us courses all the time, hoping that we'd promote them, and, seeing just tons of it, of the stuff. And it would depend on your situation and the level of copy that you wanted, but I would always recommend Scott's courses in the top 3. And now his copy course, I had different, one of the courses I'd recommend was for people who are entrepreneurs that wanted to, finish have an ad up and running by the end of the weekend, right? But I said, if you want to be a professional copywriter, if you want to make it your career, if you want to make a lot of money as a copywriter, you should get Scott's course. But when we talk about this ad today, I'm going to tell you why you should get Scott's course on top of being, even if you don't want to be a professional copywriter, because a lot of people don't realize that you want to study Gary Halbert material, and you don't, and all the good copywriters have more than one course, of course. But they have more than they study more than one course and so forth. But the reason that you also want to do that is, even if you're hiring copywriters, you want to be able to identify good copywriters versus the ones that are just, phoning it in. And copy courses like Scott's will teach you that, even if you don't plan on writing a word, even if what you're going to do is what they call copy chiefing, this is sort of an example. The one that we're going to talk about at first is not, it's sort of an example. It's kind of halfway. There's stuff that my dad copy chiefed and Scott wrote the copy for, like the body copy and stuff, or linked it together. This is one where it's like my dad very loosely copy chiefed it and said, hey, we need a piece. We need a direct mail piece. We needed to sell this product. Here's a bunch of other copy that has helped in it and stuff like that. And then Scott studied it. Scott broke it all down and then wrote his own version of it. Now, sometimes you copy chief. You're like, hey, here's the headline. Here's the story. Here's the take, the feel. This is what I want you to throw into the ad. This is the offer. Go write it. Okay. And so if you want to understand that, and you want to understand if the product that the copywriter is coming out with is quality or not, study copywriting courses. Okay. And if you want to write to that level of quality, Scott's course is top notch, and it's a must. And by the way, when I say recommend, there's only been 3 copy courses that I recommend consistently over the years. There's other ones with good value. There's good materials in the books and the GaryHalbertLetter.com and stuff like that. But his copy course was among the top 3 that I was always recommending to people, and that was before. Not only that was even sometimes the other thing about it, Scott's course wasn't always available, and I'd have to tell them, you have to reach out to them and see if you could get it. And then I told Scott, I said, I need you need to find some way so that we can start making this available to people, because I don't want to continue to recommend a course that people can't get a hold of. Right. But it was, it really is that good. And I did it all, and it was done all on my own. Everybody wants different accolades and different, things in the different things said about them in their business. And I won't, the Halbert reputation is very important to not just me, but my entire family. So we will not just recommend a course willy-nilly. I've had people send courses to us and say, would you sell this? And many times. And I said, no, we can't. And the reason we can't is it's not, that good, or there's so many of these courses that are better, or for whatever reason. Scott's was one of the ones that was so good, we reached out and said, hey, let us tell more people about it. And it's extremely good. And Scott himself, I told you about the compliment he gave me, but I'll tell you the compliment I gave him, and I knew he really, he was super impressed by it, but I didn't give out the compliment because, to make him feel good. It was true. If you want, copy that's written and sounds like Gary Halbert, Scott was the best in the world at that. I consider myself the best in the world in knowing what Gary Halbert would do. What Gary Halbert would say, what's the hook he's going to suggest, what's the kind of offer that he's going to go for, what's his strategy going to be. But when it comes down to the body copy, what I write is going to sound different from my father, and not, I'm going to write. You're supposed to write like you speak, and I speak like my father a lot because he's my dad. You speak like your parents. Everybody speaks like their parents or the people that raised them. And I've had conversations with some heavy hitters in the marketing world. They're like, man, you sound just like your father in what I say, not my voice or anything. And, and that's going to come through. When you read Scott's copy, it sounded more like my father than I do, by far. And and so he just really had the Gary Halbert tone and the Gary Halbert. When you read his copy, it was really good. There's only a couple people who've written copy as Gary Halbert, and people didn't know that it wasn't Gary, or couldn't tell, even if there was an inkling. Now, if I let you write an issue of the Gary Halbert letter as me, everybody's going to assume it's me just because it says from Bond Halbert, right? So it's not a big accomplishment to fool people into thinking that I wrote it when you actually wrote it. But when you send in the copy and I read it, and I can't tell the difference between you and my father's writing. It's a lot, right. And I'm like, wow, how much of this was my dad's writing? How much was yours? That's how good he was at, or how close he was to writing copy like my father.
Awesome, man. Appreciate this little interview you did for Scott. That was
Oh yeah.
that was awesome that we got to spend that time with him in November and at the GKIC event in San Antonio.
Thinking of going back to GKC. I got to meet up with Dan Kennedy, who was very gracious with me. I gave 3 speeches, did all of these things, but after what happened, my number one grateful moment was I'm just so glad that we got to hang out with Scott there. That beat everything. Gonna miss that guy, and for a very, very, very long time. I mean, Scott is, like I said, he was one of the very few people that I would call up and read copy to, and Scott and I, if we were out at an event or something, the quickest way to get me to an event was to tell me that Scott is there, and the quickest way to get Scott to an event was to tell him that I was there. And I know he had other buddies and stuff like that, and I have other buddies, but we were like brothers in the direct marketing world in that regard. Scott was a very young guy. I was very young when we met up in Florida. We were both working with my dad, and that continued for many years. And Scott lived here in Los Angeles for a while, and Scott, Scott is, I just can't say enough great things about the guy.
Awesome. I want to add a little bit to that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about living with Scott in Florida and Los Angeles?
Well, Los Angeles is about as far from the South as you can get. Right. we're all like hippie commie Yankee liberal scum out here to a guy like Scott. And Florida was more the speed, closer to more speed. Very Jimmy Buffett land and stuff like that. And Scott and I would hang out, and we did a lot of partying together when I was younger. But then I quit drinking at 25. And but Scott was one of the few of my friends that I'd still hang out with that didn't, because when you do quit drinking, a lot of your drinking buddies don't like that and they don't want to hang out with you. Right. But Scott and I would still hang out, and we'd still go to bars, and we'd still talk about all kinds of things. And he was a wild man in the fact that he would be, I'd go to sleep and wake up in the morning and it's like, oh, you're still going. And but when he was here in LA, one of the things that he would do is he loved to drive around, and he had so many habits that were just like my father that I didn't have. And one of them was my dad liked to think while driving. Unfortunately for the world, my dad was a terrible driver. But my dad would take road trips just to clear his mind and to start thinking. And Scott would do the same thing. He would wait till traffic died down at like 10 o'clock at night and hop into his car and drive around LA and hit up different spots and, thinking about his life and his work and whatever he was trying to, mentally work on during those times. And his favorite, watering hole was Tom Bergen's over on Fairfax. And, he was kind of, the thing was, Scott always felt like a fish out of water. You got this idea of it, but what you didn't realize until he was working or until you had a conversation with him was how much he really absorbed of everything and how much he started to got it and understood. And so he was analyzing, and you just didn't know that. You thought he was just panicking. But the truth was he was getting it done. And he was actually, I believe, I could be corrected, but I believe the piece that we're going to talk about, he wrote while he was out here. And, he was living off of San Vicente, not too far from where my apartment was at the time. And I think he wrote this piece while in Los Angeles. I'm 90% certain of that.
I didn't know that. That's good.
Yeah, well, Scott, that was the other thing about Scott, even in Florida or here, I was never at his place in Texas, but the way Scott worked was, I see that there's this arc that copywriters go through, and at the beginning of the arc, they just discovered that the value of copywriting. They're like, oh, this is the real heart of a business. Without, good marketing, nothing happens. You can have the world's, greatest product. But if, I could have a machine that spits out winning lottery numbers, but unless I get your attention and prove that to you, I can't sell anything. And so people find out what copywriting is, and they want to become copywriters, and then they want to study, and then they get courses, and they get books, and then they start working. And I'm not going to go into the rest of that thing, but at some stage, what you can find is the diligent copywriters. You'll go into their place, and there's like nothing on the wall unless they're ads. And there will be piles of books, and their shelf will be filled with a bunch of copy. They will have a desk with Post-it notes all over it. Maybe now a whiteboard, and the furniture will be very sparse. It's almost like a writing prison. And whenever I would go over to Scott's, that's what it was like. And it didn't make a difference whether it was in Florida or Los Angeles. There would be like I said, there'd be very few things on the wall. And like my dad, all of Scott's personal possessions, besides his marketing materials, would fit into like a trunk. And he would, he could, dump everything else, and for a few, move, and for a few $1,000s, just get new futons and, IKEA desks and stuff like that he needed. And he was very much like my dad in that way too.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Hey, this is Big Jason. So what's included with Shortcut Copywriting Secrets version 2, and how do you get it? All right. So number 1, you're going to get Scott's original Shortcut Copywriting Secrets course. You're going to get his original Hottest Sales Letters Volume 1. Plus, you're also going to get his missing magic order form. In Volume 1 of his Hottest Sales Letters, he mentioned an order form that he lost that worked like magic for a promotion he did for Gary Halbert. Well, I found it, and you're going to get it. Plus, you're going to get the all-new Hottest Sales Letters Volume 2. This is over 200 pages of home runs, including 4 controls. 3 of the controls are still running today because his longest running client can't find anyone who can beat Scott still today. All right, so who's going to be breaking these ads down with me? Clayton Makepeace, John Carlton, David Deutsch, Adam Carroll, Colin Chung, David Garfinkel, Brian Kurtz, $1 Million Mike Morgan, Harlan Kilstein, Kevin Rogers, Sammy Markowitz, Caleb O'Dowd, Bon Halbert, and many more. All right, so how do you get your hands on Shortcut Copywriting Secrets version 2? Well, you go to shortcutcopywritingsecrets.com and get on the wait list, because I'm going to be releasing this very soon. All right, and once you opt in, you're going to get a very special recording from a expensive Gary Halbert seminar. I found this in a promotion that Scott wrote for Gary. I was cleaning out his apartment here in Austin for his family, and it's a killer message from No Sex Gary, a real honest-to-God way to get rich with direct marketing, okay? So you're going to get that just for opting into the wait list, all right? And then on the thank you page in the welcome email, there's going to be a link for my private Facebook group for Shortcut Copywriting Secrets version 2. Join that, because I'm going to be releasing some rare audios and interviews and some information that I found in Scott's stuff that's really cool that I'm not going to release anywhere else. So once again, this is Big Jason. Thank you so much for helping me continue Scott's legacy. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Scott was my best friend. So go to shortcutcopywritingsecrets.com, and I'll see you there.
Sure, actually. So I got into direct response in 2001, and stumbled upon this whole world of direct response, and I got really drawn to copywriting in particular. So I started studying Gary Halbert, the Gary Halbert letter, actually, old cassettes that I still... Yeah, sure, absolutely. That's the copy right here. The Gary Halbert Masterpiece Collection is next to it. Kick-Ass Copywriting Secrets is next to it.